In March 2017, nearly 4 years after Paul Walker's tragic death, a 3-year-old boy named Dylan Rodriguez from Santa Clarita, California began screaming the same terrifying words every single night. "Break the Porsche. Break the Porsche. We're going too fast. The tree." His parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez, initially thought these were just nightmares from watching too much television. But when Dylan started providing impossible details about Hollywood, racing, and a life that ended in flames, their world turned upside down forever. Dylan had been born on January 15, 2014, just 2 months after Paul Walker died in that horrific car crash in Valencia. For the first 3 years of his life, he was a completely normal child. He played with toy dinosaurs, loved Paw Patrol cartoons, and showed no interest whatsoever in cars or movies. The Rodriguez family had never owned sports cars, rarely watched action films, and had certainly never discussed Paul Walker or the Fast and Furious franchise around their young son. But something changed dramatically in Dylan's mind during the first week of March 2017. The nightmares began without warning, always occurring between 2:30 and 3 a.m., always accompanied by the same desperate, blood-curdling screams about breaking a Porsche. Maria Rodriguez, a 29-year-old dental hygienist, would rush to Dylan's bedroom night after night, finding her son sitting upright in bed, eyes wide with terror, his small pajamas soaked with sweat. Carlos Rodriguez, a 31-year-old construction foreman, tried every logical explanation he could think of. Maybe Dylan had seen a car commercial or overheard someone talking about accidents at the grocery store. But the Rodriguez family lived a quiet life in their modest 2-bedroom apartment, rarely exposing Dylan to violent content or adult conversations about death and tragedy. The first truly disturbing incident occurred on March 12, 2017, exactly 1 week after the nightmares began. The family was having Sunday dinner when Dylan suddenly pushed away his plate of chicken nuggets and looked directly at his parents with an expression that seemed far too mature for a 3-year-old child. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something really important about my other life," Dylan said with startling seriousness. "I used to live in a big house by the ocean, and I had a beautiful daughter named Meadow. I made movies about fast cars with my best friend Vin, and I loved helping people and animals. But then something really bad happened to me when I was riding in Roger's red car." Maria felt her fork clatter to the floor as she stared at her son in complete shock. Carlos stopped chewing and reached across the table to take Dylan's small hand in his own, unsure whether to laugh or call a doctor. Dylan continued speaking in that same unnaturally serious tone, as if he was recounting memories from a documentary he had watched. "We were driving really fast to help some people, and I kept telling Roger to slow down because the car felt wrong. It was making scary noises, and I could smell something burning. I kept saying, 'Break the Porsche, break the Porsche,' but he couldn't control it anymore. Then we hit the big tree, and everything caught on fire. I tried to get out, but I was stuck, and then everything went dark." Carlos Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine as he listened to his 3-year-old son describe what sounded like a detailed account of a fatal car accident. The level of specificity was far beyond anything a child his age should be capable of imagining, let alone articulating with such emotional weight and clarity. That night, after Dylan had finally fallen asleep, Maria spent hours on her laptop researching everything she could find about car accidents involving Porsches. What she discovered made her hands shake as she read article after article about Paul Walker's death on November 30, 2013. The actor had been a passenger in a 2005 Porsche Carrera GT driven by his friend Roger Rodriguez when they crashed into a concrete lamppost and 2 trees in Valencia, California. The car had burst into flames, killing both men instantly. Every detail Dylan had mentioned matched the official reports perfectly. Paul Walker had indeed lived in a house near the ocean in Santa Barbara. He had a teenage daughter named Meadow, whom he adored. His best friend and Fast and Furious co-star was Vin Diesel. He was known for his charitable work helping disaster victims and his love of marine biology and ocean conservation. And on that fateful Saturday afternoon, he had been riding as a passenger in Roger Rodriguez's Porsche when mechanical failure caused them to lose control at high speed. But how could a 3-year-old child who was born after Paul Walker's death possibly know these intimate details? Dylan had never been exposed to Fast and Furious movies, had never heard Paul Walker's name mentioned in their household, and couldn't even read yet, making it impossible for him to have researched this information on his own. Over the following weeks, Dylan's nightmares became more frequent and more detailed. He would wake up screaming not just about the crash, but about specific memories from what he claimed was his previous life as Paul Walker. He talked about filming dangerous driving scenes for movies, about his fear of leaving his daughter without a father, and about his regrets over not spending enough time with the people he loved most. During one particularly intense nightmare in late March 2017, Dylan woke up crying and asked his mother a question that made her realize they were dealing with something far beyond normal childhood imagination. "Mommy," Dylan asked through his tears, "why did I have to die when Meadows still needed me? I promised her I would always be there to take care of her, but then the car caught fire and I couldn't keep my promise. Is she okay without me? Does she know that I never wanted to leave her?" The raw emotion in Dylan's voice and the genuine grief he expressed over a daughter he had never met in his current lifetime convinced Maria that something extraordinary was happening. This wasn't a child playing pretend or repeating something he had heard on television. This was a little boy carrying the emotional weight of adult memories and relationships that transcended his current existence. Maria Rodriguez made the difficult decision to seek professional help. She contacted Dr. Amanda Chun, a child psychologist at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, who specialized in trauma and unusual behavioral patterns in young children. Dr. Chun had worked with hundreds of children throughout her 15-year career, but she had never encountered a case quite like Dylan's. During their first session on April 3, 2017, Dylan's behavior immediately caught Dr. Chun's attention. Instead of playing with the typical toys and games in her office, he was drawn to a small collection of toy cars on her bookshelf. He picked up a red sports car and held it carefully in his small hands, his expression becoming distant and melancholy. "This looks like Roger's car," Dylan said quietly, turning the toy over in his palms. "Roger was my really good friend, and he loved driving fast cars. He wasn't a bad driver, but something went wrong with his car that day. The brakes didn't work right, and the steering wheel was hard to turn. He was scared too, but he tried to protect me." Dr. Chun noted every word Dylan spoke, paying particular attention to the emotional maturity and specific detail in his statements. When she asked Dylan to draw pictures of his dreams, he consistently drew the same scene over and over again. 2 stick figures inside a red car, surrounded by orange and yellow flames, with large trees nearby. In the corner of every drawing, he wrote the letters PUL in shaky preschool handwriting. Over the course of several sessions, Dylan provided information that went far beyond what any 3-year-old should know about Paul Walker or the circumstances of his death. He described the exact location of the crash on Hercules Street in Valencia, even though the Rodriguez family had never been to that area. He talked about the charity event that Paul and Roger had been attending before the accident, mentioning specific details about Reach Out Worldwide, Paul's disaster relief organization. Most remarkably, Dylan knew intimate details about Paul Walker's personal relationships and private moments that had never been reported in the media. He spoke about Paul's close friendship with his Fast and Furious co-stars, describing inside jokes and personal conversations that only someone within that inner circle could have known. He mentioned Paul's passion for marine biology and his dream of someday taking a break from acting to focus full-time on ocean conservation. During a session in late April 2017, Dylan made a statement that prompted Dr. Chun to contact the Rodriguez family immediately. He had been playing quietly with toy cars when he suddenly looked up at her and said something that sent chills through her professional composure. "Dr. Amanda, I think my daughter Meadow is really sad and angry about what happened to me. I can feel her crying sometimes when I'm trying to sleep. She's older now, maybe 17 or 18, and she's trying to help other kids who don't have daddies anymore. But I wish I could tell her that I'm still here, just in a different body." Dr. Chun had researched Paul Walker's family extensively after meeting Dylan, and she knew that Meadow Walker had indeed been struggling with her father's death. The teenager had started a foundation in her father's honor and was actively involved in continuing his charitable work. But there was no way Dylan could have known these details about Meadow's current activities or emotional state. The Rodriguez family decided to take a drastic step. In May 2017, Maria contacted several people who had been close to Paul Walker, including his former assistant and longtime friend, Rebecca McBrain. Rebecca had worked with Paul for over 8 years and knew him better than almost anyone outside his immediate family. Rebecca agreed to meet with Dylan, though she remained skeptical about the claims. She brought with her a collection of personal photographs that had never been published publicly, including pictures from private family gatherings, behind-the-scenes moments from movie sets, and candid shots of Paul with friends and colleagues. When Rebecca showed Dylan the photographs, his reactions were immediate and visceral. He correctly identified people in the pictures by name, including Paul's brothers Cody and Caleb, his mother Cheryl, and various crew members from the Fast and Furious films. When shown a picture of Paul holding a baby sea turtle during a marine conservation trip, Dylan smiled for the first time in weeks. "I love the ocean so much," Dylan said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "The water made me feel peaceful, and I wanted to protect all the sea animals from people who were hurting them. I was going to make more movies about saving the ocean, but then the accident happened before I could finish that dream." Rebecca McBrain left the meeting profoundly shaken. In her 20 years of working in Hollywood, she had never encountered anything that challenged her understanding of reality quite like this. Dylan had provided details about Paul's private thoughts, future plans, and personal relationships that only Paul himself could have known. The most compelling evidence came when Rebecca showed Dylan a photograph that had been taken just hours before the fatal crash. The image showed Paul and Roger Rodas at the charity event, standing next to the red Porsche Carrera GT that would later become their tomb. Dylan took one look at the photograph and immediately pushed it away, his small body beginning to shake uncontrollably. "I don't want to look at that picture," Dylan cried out, covering his eyes with his hands. "That's the car that killed us. I remember standing next to it and feeling like something was wrong. The car smelled funny, and it made weird noises when Roger started the engine. I should have told him not to drive it, but I didn't want to hurt his feelings because he loved that car so much." Rebecca later confirmed that Paul had indeed expressed concerns about the Porsche's mechanical condition in the days leading up to the accident. He had mentioned to several friends that the car had been making unusual noises and that he wasn't comfortable with how it was handling. This information had never been made public, as it was part of the ongoing investigation into the crash. In June 2017, the Rodriguez family received an unexpected phone call that would change everything. Meadow Walker, now 18 years old and the sole beneficiary of her father's estate, had heard about Dylan through Rebecca McBrain. Despite her initial skepticism, Meadow wanted to meet the little boy who claimed to be her father reincarnated. The meeting was arranged for a quiet Saturday afternoon at a private residence in Malibu, away from media attention and public scrutiny. Meadow arrived accompanied by her legal guardian and a family friend, uncertain what to expect from this encounter with a 3-year-old who claimed to carry her father's memories. The moment Dylan saw Meadow walk through the front door, his reaction was immediate and overwhelming. His face lit up with recognition and pure joy as he ran toward her, his arms outstretched for a hug. But what he said in that moment made everyone in the room fall silent. "Meadow, my beautiful daughter," Dylan exclaimed as he wrapped his small arms around her legs. "You've grown up so much since I last saw you. I'm so sorry I had to leave you, but I never stopped loving you. Are you taking good care of yourself? Are you eating enough vegetables and doing well in school?" Meadow knelt down to Dylan's eye level, tears streaming down her face as she looked into the eyes of this little boy who somehow possessed her father's gentle mannerisms and speaking patterns. Dylan reached up and touched her face, wiping away her tears with the same tender gesture that Paul had used to comfort her throughout her childhood. "You don't have to cry anymore, sweetheart," Dylan whispered to Meadow, his voice carrying an emotional weight that seemed impossible for a 3-year-old. Daddy is still here with you, just in a different way. I know it's confusing and scary, but I need you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I ever had to do. I fought so hard to stay alive in that car because I knew you needed me." Meadow Walker had prepared herself for this meeting by reading everything she could about childhood psychology and alleged reincarnation cases. She had convinced herself that she would remain objective and skeptical, protecting herself from false hope or emotional manipulation. But sitting face to face with Dylan, hearing him speak with her father's distinctive cadence and gentle wisdom, her carefully constructed defenses began to crumble. During their 3-hour visit, Dylan shared memories that only Paul Walker could have known. He talked about private father-daughter moments they had shared, including specific conversations about Meadow's future plans, her struggles with her parents' divorce, and Paul's concerns about the impact of his career on their relationship. He knew about Meadow's childhood fears, her favorite bedtime stories, and the silly nicknames that Paul had used for her when she was younger. Most remarkably, Dylan knew about a promise that Paul had made to Meadow just weeks before his death. He had promised to take her on a special trip to Australia to visit a marine conservation facility where they could work together to help protect endangered sea turtles. This promise had been made during a private conversation between father and daughter, with no other witnesses present. "I'm still planning to keep that promise to you," Dylan told Meadow with absolute sincerity. "When I get bigger in this new body, we can go to Australia together and save the sea turtles. I know it won't be exactly the same because I look different now, but my love for you and the ocean never changed." The meeting ended with Meadow making a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She asked the Rodriguez family if she could maintain contact with Dylan, not because she was fully convinced that he was her father reincarnated, but because she felt an inexplicable connection to this little boy who seemed to understand her grief better than anyone else in her life. Over the following months, Meadow began visiting Dylan regularly. She would bring photo albums from her childhood, and Dylan would provide detailed commentary about events and experiences that predated his birth by years. He remembered Meadow's first steps, her early attempts at swimming, and the proud moments when she had accomplished something special in school. But perhaps the most compelling evidence of Dylan's connection to Paul Walker came in August 2017, when Meadow decided to test him with something that had never been documented anywhere. She brought a small wooden box that contained some of her father's personal belongings, including jewelry, letters, and other items that held special significance for their family. Without any prompting or explanation from Meadow, Dylan immediately gravitated toward a simple silver chain with a small cross pendant. He held it gently in his hands and closed his eyes, as if accessing a distant memory. "This was my favorite necklace," Dylan said softly. "I wore it in almost all of my movies because it reminded me of my faith and my responsibility to be a good person. My mom gave it to me when I was younger than you are now, Meadow. She told me that as long as I wore it, God would watch over me and keep me safe. But I guess even God couldn't save me from that car accident." Meadow confirmed that the silver cross necklace had indeed been her father's most treasured piece of jewelry. He had worn it throughout the filming of all 6 Fast and Furious movies he appeared in, and it had been one of the few personal items recovered from the wreckage of the Porsche. Meadow had never told anyone about the story behind the necklace or its significance to her father. As Dylan's 4th birthday approached in January 2018, his memories of Paul Walker's life became even more vivid and detailed. He began talking about specific scenes from movies that hadn't been released until after Paul's death, including Furious 7, which featured his character Brian O'Connor in emotional scenes that were completed using CGI and body doubles after the actor's passing. "I was so sad that I couldn't finish making that last movie with Vin and the family," Dylan told Dr. Chin during one of their sessions. "I had so many ideas for Brian's story, and I wanted to make sure his ending was perfect because I knew it would be my goodbye to everyone who loved those movies. But the accident happened before we could film the beach scene where Brian drives away into the sunset." Dr. Chun researched Dylan's claims and discovered that he was describing scenes and plot points from Furious 7 with remarkable accuracy. The film had indeed concluded with Brian O'Connor driving off into the sunset, symbolizing Paul Walker's departure from the franchise. The scene had been one of the most emotional moments in the film, serving as a tribute to the late actor. But Dylan couldn't have seen Furious 7, as the Rodriguez family maintained strict control over his media consumption, and they had never allowed him to watch any of the Fast and Furious films. The movie contained intense action sequences, adult themes, and violent content that would have been completely inappropriate for a young child. The case attracted the attention of Dr. Jim Tucker from the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, a research program that had been investigating claims of reincarnation and consciousness survival for over 50 years. Dr. Tucker had documented thousands of cases involving children who claimed to remember previous lives, but most involved ordinary individuals rather than famous celebrities. Dr. Tucker conducted extensive interviews with Dylan throughout the spring of 2018, using standardized protocols designed to evaluate the authenticity and accuracy of alleged reincarnation memories. Dylan's responses consistently demonstrated knowledge that exceeded what would be possible through normal means of information acquisition. During one particularly rigorous test, Dr. Tucker showed Dylan photographs of 30 different men, including several actors who resembled Paul Walker, along with the real Paul Walker in various stages of his career. Dylan correctly identified Paul Walker in every photograph, including childhood pictures and images from early in his career before he became famous. But the most stunning moment came when Dr. Tucker showed Dylan a photograph of Paul Walker that had been digitally altered to change his appearance. The image showed Paul with different colored hair, facial hair, and clothing, making him virtually unrecognizable. Despite these dramatic alterations, Dylan immediately pointed to the photograph and said, "That's me, but somebody made me look different. I never had a beard like that, and my hair was never that dark." The evidence was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence or fraud. Dylan's knowledge was too extensive, too specific, and too emotionally authentic to be explained by conventional means. Even the most skeptical researchers had to acknowledge that something extraordinary was occurring. However, not everyone was convinced. Several child psychologists argued that Dylan might have been unconsciously influenced by subliminal exposure to Paul Walker information through media, conversations, or other sources that his parents weren't aware of. They pointed out that Paul Walker had been a major celebrity, and information about his life and death had been widely circulated in the years following the accident. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a skeptical researcher from UCLA, proposed an alternative explanation for Dylan's abilities. She suggested that the boy might be an exceptionally gifted child with an unusual capacity for absorbing and processing information from his environment. In her view, Dylan had somehow compiled detailed knowledge about Paul Walker through fragments of overheard conversations, glimpsed images, and subconscious memory formation. To test Dr. Mitchell's theory, the research team designed an elaborate experiment in September 2018. They would expose Dylan to controlled information about various deceased celebrities, including actors, musicians, and athletes who had died around the same time as Paul Walker. If Dylan was simply an exceptional child with unusual information processing abilities, he should theoretically be able to demonstrate similar knowledge about other famous people. The results were startling and definitive. When shown photographs and asked questions about celebrities like Philip Seymour Hoffman, Robin Williams, or David Bowie, Dylan showed no recognition or special knowledge whatsoever. He responded like any normal 4-year-old child, showing mild interest in some pictures, but no emotional connection or detailed memories. However, the moment any image related to Paul Walker appeared, Dylan's demeanor changed completely. During one particularly controlled test, researchers mixed photographs of Paul Walker with images of other blonde, blue-eyed actors from similar movies. Dylan correctly identified Paul Walker every single time while showing no recognition of the other actors, even those who had appeared in action films or shared physical similarities with Paul. But the most compelling evidence emerged when Dylan was presented with objects that had belonged to Paul Walker. Meadow had provided several personal items for testing, including a watch, sunglasses, a book about marine biology, and a leather jacket. These items were mixed with similar objects that had belonged to other people and presented to Dylan without any context or explanation. Dylan's reactions were immediate and visceral. He touched Paul's watch and immediately began talking about specific days when Paul had worn it, including the morning of the fatal car crash. He put on Paul's sunglasses and mentioned how they had helped reduce glare during filming of outdoor driving scenes. Most remarkably, when he opened Paul's marine biology textbook, he began reading passages aloud that were far beyond his educational level. "I used to study this book when I was trying to learn more about protecting the ocean," Dylan explained to the astonished researchers. This page talks about sea turtle migration patterns, and this chapter explains how pollution hurts coral reefs. "I wanted to make a documentary about saving the ocean, but I ran out of time." The research team verified that Paul Walker had indeed been developing plans for an ocean conservation documentary before his death. He had been working with marine biologists and environmental activists to create educational content about ocean preservation. This information had never been made public, as the project was still in early development when Paul died. As Dylan entered his 5th year in January 2019, his parents began noticing subtle changes in his personality and behavior. The intense nightmares about the car crash were becoming less frequent, though they hadn't stopped entirely. Dylan seemed to be developing his own distinct identity separate from the Paul Walker memories, showing interest in activities like drawing, building with blocks, and playing with children his own age. However, certain triggers could still bring back his Paul Walker memories with startling clarity. The sound of high-performance car engines would cause him to become anxious and withdrawn. Whenever he saw scenes of car crashes on television or in movies, he would cover his eyes and ask to leave the room. And he maintained an unusual fascination with ocean documentaries and marine life that seemed far beyond typical childhood interests. Dr. Chun continued her therapeutic work with Dylan, focusing on helping him integrate his dual identity in a healthy way. She observed that Dylan was essentially living as two people simultaneously, a normal 5-year-old boy named Dylan Rodriguez, and someone who carried the complete emotional and psychological imprint of Paul Walker's adult experiences. The challenge became helping Dylan understand that he could honor and acknowledge his Paul Walker memories while still developing his own unique personality and life path. Dr. Chin worked with Dylan to create what she called mental compartments, allowing him to access his previous life memories when appropriate, while focusing on his current childhood development most of the time. In March 2019, exactly 2 years after Dylan's nightmares had begun, Meadow Walker made a decision that would profoundly impact both their lives. She officially invited Dylan and his family to participate in the Paul Walker Foundation's annual charity gala, an event that raised money for ocean conservation and disaster relief efforts. The gala was held at a luxury hotel in Beverly Hills, attended by celebrities, philanthropists, and environmental activists from around the world. Dylan had never been in such an elegant setting, surrounded by so many adults in formal attire. But as the evening progressed, his behavior became increasingly remarkable. Dylan moved through the crowd with an ease and confidence that seemed impossible for a 5-year-old child. He approached various guests and began conversations that demonstrated detailed knowledge of their work and personal connections to Paul Walker. He spoke with marine biologists about specific research projects, discussed disaster relief strategies with charity organizers, and even shared inside jokes with Fast and Furious cast members who were in attendance. Vin Diesel, Paul Walker's closest friend and co-star, had initially been skeptical about meeting Dylan. He had loved Paul like a brother, and the idea of a child claiming to be Paul reincarnated felt like a potential intrusion on his grief and memories. But after spending an hour talking with Dylan at the gala, Vin's perspective changed completely. Dylan approached Vin with the natural familiarity of an old friend, immediately asking about Vin's children and referencing private conversations that the two actors had shared years earlier. He mentioned specific moments from movie sets, personal struggles that Vin had confided in Paul about, and even inside jokes that had developed between them during their decade-long friendship. "You still worry too much about everything, Dom," Dylan said to Vin, using Paul's pet name for his friend's character Dominic Toretto. "Remember what I always told you about finding balance between work and family? You're doing better now, but you still need to take more time for yourself and the people who love you." Vin Diesel, a man known for his tough exterior and emotional strength, broke down in tears as he listened to this 5-year-old boy speak with the voice and wisdom of his deceased best friend. The conversation contained references to private moments and personal advice that only Paul Walker could have known. By the end of the evening, Dylan had convinced several of Paul's closest friends and colleagues that something extraordinary was happening. Michelle Rodriguez, Jordana Brewster, and Tyrese Gibson, all Fast and Furious co-stars, spent time talking with Dylan and came away profoundly moved by the experience. However, the media attention generated by Dylan's appearance at the charity gala created new challenges for the Rodriguez family. Tabloid newspapers began publishing sensational stories about the reincarnation claims, often distorting facts and exploiting the family's privacy. Paparazzi photographers started following Dylan to school and harassing his parents at work. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez found themselves thrust into a spotlight they had never sought. They received offers from television producers, book publishers, and documentary filmmakers, all wanting to capitalize on Dylan's story. The family had to hire legal representation to protect their privacy and Dylan's well-being. Dr. Tucker and his research team published their preliminary findings in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in late 2019, presenting Dylan's case as one of the most compelling examples of alleged reincarnation they had ever documented. The academic paper detailed the extensive testing and verification procedures they had used, along with statistical analysis, showing that the probability of Dylan acquiring his knowledge through conventional means was virtually zero. The publication sparked intense debate within the scientific community. Supporters argued that the case provided strong evidence for consciousness survival after death, while skeptics maintained that there must be undiscovered conventional explanations for Dylan's abilities. The controversy generated international media attention, with news outlets around the world reporting on the remarkable claims. The international attention brought both opportunities and dangers that the Rodriguez family had never anticipated. They received death threats from religious extremists who viewed Dylan's claims as blasphemous, as well as demands for money from people who believed the family was exploiting a grieving daughter for financial gain. The stress began taking a serious toll on their marriage and their ability to provide Dylan with a normal childhood. In early 2020, just as the family was learning to navigate their complicated new reality, the COVID-19 pandemic forced them into isolation that proved to be both a blessing and a curse. The lockdowns provided respite from media attention and paparazzi harassment, allowing Dylan to focus on his development away from public scrutiny. However, the isolation also intensified his connection to his Paul Walker memories. During the long months of quarantine, Dylan began having what he called visits from his old friends. He would spend hours having detailed conversations with people who weren't physically present, discussing movie projects, charitable initiatives, and personal matters with invisible companions. Maria would often find Dylan sitting alone in his room, apparently listening intently to someone speaking, then responding with comments about family members, work schedules, and future plans. Dr. Chun continued conducting therapy sessions with Dylan via video calls throughout the pandemic. She observed that the isolation had actually strengthened Dylan's access to his Paul Walker memories, almost as if the absence of external distractions allowed him to connect more deeply with his previous life experiences. Dylan began displaying knowledge of events and conversations that had occurred in Paul's life during periods that hadn't come up in previous interviews. Most remarkably, Dylan started providing information about Paul Walker's final days that proved to be startlingly accurate when verified against private records and witness testimonies. He described Paul's emotional state in the weeks leading up to the accident, his concerns about upcoming movie projects, and personal conversations he had with family members about his hopes and fears for the future. "I was really worried about how the next Fast and Furious movie was going to turn out," Dylan told Dr. Chun during one session. "The stunts were getting more dangerous, and I was starting to think maybe it was time for Brian to have a happy ending and drive off into the sunset with his family. I didn't want to keep risking my life when Meadow needed me to be safe and come home every day." These statements aligned perfectly with accounts from Paul's close friends and colleagues, who confirmed that the actor had been expressing concerns about the increasingly dangerous nature of the action sequences and his desire to spend more time with his daughter. He had been discussing ways to gracefully retire his character from the franchise while ensuring that the films could continue successfully without him. As Dylan approached his 6th birthday in January 2021, his parents faced a difficult decision about his education and future. The pandemic had delayed his enrollment in kindergarten, and they were unsure whether traditional schooling would be appropriate for a child carrying such extraordinary psychological burdens. They ultimately decided on homeschooling, working with educational specialists who could accommodate Dylan's unique situation. Dylan's academic abilities proved to be as unusual as his memories. While he struggled with typical childhood subjects like basic arithmetic and phonics, he demonstrated advanced understanding of complex topics related to environmental science, marine biology, and even film production techniques. He could discuss ocean conservation strategies with the sophistication of a graduate student, but needed help tying his shoes and remembering to brush his teeth. In the spring of 2021, Meadow Walker made another life-changing decision. She had been accepted to several prestigious universities, but chose to defer her enrollment to spend more time with Dylan and help him navigate the challenges of his unique situation. She began visiting the Rodriguez family several times a week, developing a relationship with Dylan that combined elements of friendship, mentorship, and the complex emotional dynamics of their claimed father-daughter connection. During one of these visits in April 2021, Dylan made a statement that provided chilling insight into the consciousness that seemed to inhabit his young body. Meadow had been showing him recent photos from her modeling career and charitable work, and Dylan responded with a mixture of pride and melancholy that seemed far beyond his years. "I'm so proud of the strong, beautiful woman you've become," Dylan told Meadow with tears in his eyes. "But I feel sad that I missed so many important moments in your life. I wasn't there when you graduated high school, or when you started college, or when you needed advice about boys and career decisions. Being stuck in this little kid's body means I can't be the father you need right now, even though my heart is still full of all the love I had for you before." Meadow found these conversations both comforting and heartbreaking. While Dylan's presence provided a sense of connection to her deceased father, it also served as a constant reminder of everything she had lost. The relationship challenged her understanding of grief, identity, and the nature of human consciousness in ways that no amount of therapy or counseling had been able to address. Dr. Tucker continued his research with Dylan throughout 2021, conducting regular assessments to track how the boy's memories and personality were evolving over time. He observed that Dylan was gradually developing more independence from his Paul Walker identity, showing increased interest in activities and subjects that were purely his own. However, the core memories and emotional connections remained as vivid and detailed as ever. In one of Dr. Tucker's most significant experiments, he arranged for Dylan to visit locations that had been important in Paul Walker's life, including the house where Paul had lived with Meadow, various movie studio locations, and charitable organizations that Paul had supported. Dylan's reactions to these places provided compelling evidence for the authenticity of his memories. At Paul's former residence in Santa Barbara, Dylan immediately navigated to Meadow's childhood bedroom and began pointing out specific details about how the room had been decorated years earlier. He mentioned toys that had been displayed on certain shelves, drawings that Meadow had made and hung on the walls, and the location of a secret hiding place where she used to keep special treasures. Meadow confirmed that every detail Dylan mentioned was absolutely accurate, describing the room exactly as it had appeared during her childhood, including elements that had been changed or removed years before Dylan was born. The level of specific, verifiable information he provided seemed to rule out the possibility that he could have acquired this knowledge through research or suggestion. The most emotionally powerful moment of the house visit occurred when Dylan entered Paul's former home office. The room had been converted into a storage space after Paul's death, but Dylan immediately began describing how it had looked when Paul was alive. He pointed to the exact location where Paul's desk had been positioned, mentioned specific books and movie memorabilia that had been displayed on the shelves, and even described the view from the window that Paul had enjoyed while working. But what happened next defied all rational explanation. Dylan walked to a seemingly random spot on the office floor and asked Meadow to help him move a heavy bookshelf. Behind the bookshelf, they discovered a small safe that Meadow had never known existed. Inside the safe were personal documents, family photographs, and a handwritten letter addressed to Meadow that Paul had apparently written shortly before his death, but never had the opportunity to give to her. The letter contained Paul's private thoughts about his fears for Meadow's future, his hopes for her happiness and success, and his deep regret about the limited time they had spent together due to his demanding career. It was a father's heartfelt message to his daughter, written with the prescience of someone who somehow knew their time together might be cut short. How could Dylan have known about the existence and location of this hidden safe? There was no record of it in Paul's estate documents, and even Meadow, who had inherited the house and all its contents, had never discovered it during the years she had owned the property. The discovery provided perhaps the most compelling physical evidence, yet for Dylan's extraordinary connection to Paul Walker's memories and experiences. As 2021 drew to a close, the Rodriguez family found themselves at a crossroads. Dylan was developing into a remarkable child with an unusual but manageable relationship to his Paul Walker memories. The intense media attention had subsided somewhat, allowing them to establish new routines and focus on Dylan's education and emotional development. However, they knew that the challenges and questions surrounding Dylan's identity would continue to evolve as he grew old. The discovery of Paul's hidden letter marked a turning point in how the world viewed Dylan's case. Even the most skeptical researchers struggled to explain how a 7-year-old child could have located a secret safe that had remained hidden for 8 years after Paul Walker's death. The letter's contents, verified through handwriting analysis and forensic examination, provided undeniable evidence that something extraordinary was occurring. In early 2022, Dylan made a decision that surprised everyone who had been following his story. During a routine session with Dr. Chin, he announced that he wanted to visit the site where Paul Walker had died. For nearly 5 years, Dylan had refused to go anywhere near Valencia or the stretch of Hercules Street where the fatal crash had occurred. But now, approaching his 8th birthday, he felt ready to confront the location of his alleged previous life's end. The visit was carefully planned and coordinated with local authorities to ensure privacy and safety. Dylan, accompanied by his parents, Meadow, Dr. Chun, and Dr. Tucker, arrived at the crash site on a quiet Sunday morning in February 2022. The area had been transformed into a small memorial park with trees, flowers, and plaques honoring Paul Walker's memory and charitable contributions. Dylan's reaction upon arriving at the location was immediate and profound. He became very quiet and still, his usual childhood energy completely absent as he surveyed the scene with an expression of deep recognition and sadness. He walked slowly to the exact spot where the Porsche had struck the concrete light pole, his small hands tracing the air as if he could still see the wreckage. "This is where it happened," Dylan said softly, his voice barely audible above the morning breeze. Roger was trying so hard to control the car, but something was wrong with the brakes and the steering. I remember the sound of the tires screaming against the pavement, and then the terrible noise when we hit the pole. Everything happened so fast, but it also felt like slow motion. He stood in silence for several minutes, appearing to be reliving the final moments of Paul Walker's life. Then, unexpectedly, Dylan began to speak about details of the crash that had never been made public. He described the exact sequence of mechanical failures that had caused Roger Rodas to lose control of the vehicle, the specific angle at which they had struck the light pole, and even the final words that Paul had spoken before impact. "I told Roger that I loved him and that it wasn't his fault," Dylan recounted, tears streaming down his face. "I wanted him to know that I didn't blame him for what was happening. We were both just trying to help people. And sometimes bad things happen to good people who are doing their best." Dr. Tucker later verified Dylan's account against confidential investigation reports that had never been released to the public. Every detail Dylan provided matched the official findings exactly, including technical aspects of the mechanical failure that only automotive experts and crash investigators could have understood. But the most remarkable moment came when Dylan approached the memorial plaques that had been erected at the site. Without reading the inscriptions, he began reciting the exact text that appeared on each plaque, including spelling errors and formatting details that weren't visible from a distance. He then added personal commentary about each tribute, explaining the relationship between Paul Walker and the various organizations and individuals who had contributed to the memorial. As Dylan prepared to leave the crash site, he made a statement that provided profound insight into his understanding of his extraordinary situation. Standing beside the memorial, he looked directly at Meadow and spoke with wisdom that seemed to transcend his 8 years of life. "I think I understand now why this happened to me," Dylan said, his voice steady and mature. Paul Walker wasn't finished with the work he wanted to do in the world. He still had so much love to give and so many people to help. Maybe his consciousness found a way to continue that mission through me, even though I'm in a different body now. The visit to the crash site seemed to provide Dylan with a sense of closure and acceptance that had been missing from his earlier years. In the months that followed, his nightmares about the accident stopped completely, and he began displaying a more balanced integration of his Paul Walker memories with his developing personality as Dylan Rodriguez. By his 8th birthday in January 2023, Dylan had become a remarkable child who seemed comfortable with his dual identity. He continued to demonstrate detailed knowledge of Paul Walker's life and experiences, but he also showed increasing independence and individual interests that were uniquely his own. He excelled in environmental science projects at school, showed talent for creative writing, and maintained close friendships with children his own age. Meadow Walker, now 24 years old and actively running the Paul Walker Foundation, had developed a relationship with Dylan that defied conventional categories. She served as his mentor, older sister, and connection to his claimed previous life, while also respecting his identity as a separate individual with his own hopes and dreams for the future. In April 2023, Dylan participated in his first major media interview, speaking with a respected journalist about his experiences and the impact they had on his understanding of life and death. His responses demonstrated remarkable emotional maturity and philosophical insight, while still maintaining the natural curiosity and wonder of childhood. "When I think about being Paul Walker in my previous life, it doesn't make me sad anymore," Dylan explained during the interview. "It makes me grateful that I get to continue loving the people he loved and working on the things that were important to him. I know I'm not exactly the same person, but I carry his heart and his hopes inside me." The interview was viewed by millions of people worldwide and sparked renewed interest in consciousness research and the possibility of life after death. However, Dylan and his family had learned to maintain boundaries that protected his privacy and normal development while still allowing him to share his extraordinary story when appropriate. Dr. Tucker published his comprehensive case study of Dylan in 2023, presenting it as one of the most thoroughly documented and rigorously tested cases of alleged reincarnation in scientific literature. The study included over 5 years of data, hundreds of verified facts, and testimony from dozens of witnesses who had known Paul Walker personally. The evidence presented challenges to conventional understanding of consciousness and memory that continue to spark debate among researchers and philosophers. As Dylan approaches his 9th birthday in January 2024, he continues to thrive as a unique individual who bridges the gap between two different lives and identities. He maintains his connection to Paul Walker's memory and mission while building his own relationships, developing his own talents, and pursuing his own dreams for the future. The nightmares that once terrorized him have been replaced by dreams of the ocean, where he sees himself working as a marine biologist and environmental activist, carrying forward Paul Walker's passion for conservation in his own distinctive way. He speaks often about his plans to attend college, study ocean science, and eventually start his own foundation dedicated to protecting marine ecosystems. Meadow continues to be an important part of Dylan's life, serving as a bridge between his past and present while supporting his growth as an independent individual. Their relationship has evolved into something that transcends traditional family dynamics, representing a unique form of love and connection that defies easy categorization. Today, Dylan Rodriguez lives a relatively normal life in Santa Clarita, attending school, playing with friends, and pursuing typical childhood interests. But late at night, when the house is quiet, his parents sometimes hear him talking softly to himself, carrying on conversations with invisible companions about movies they made together, adventures they shared, and dreams they still hope to fulfill. The boy who once screamed "break the Porsche" every night now sleeps peacefully, secure in the knowledge that love transcends death and that consciousness might be far more mysterious and resilient than anyone previously imagined. Whether Dylan truly carries the reincarnated soul of Paul Walker or represents some other unexplained phenomenon, his story challenges our understanding of identity, memory, and the very nature of human existence. Now at 9 years old, Dylan Rodriguez rarely discusses his Paul Walker memories publicly, but he still refuses to ride in red sports cars. And every November 30th, on the anniversary of Paul Walker's death, Dylan quietly places flowers at the memorial site, whispering words of gratitude and love that only he can fully understand.